Last 2 times require you to kill them within a few turns of each other, or else they come back at full health. So you need to spread your damage thin to get every part low enough to knock them all out at the end of a turn.
It's Dante!
I see. My ass.
Arc kicks off when Makoto reveals that she has a recording that incriminates you as the Phantom Thieves, and uses this to blackmail you to have you look into an issue of students from the school being taken advantage of in the red light district. Yusuke once again proving to be the only character with a brain, and says that this recording of you talking about being Phantom Thieves is not enough evidence to incriminate you, and absolutely have no way to prove how you change hearts. Everyone just seemingly forgets that you go to a magical other dimension to fight a caricature of evil people and steal their most desired items. But of course, everyone ignores this and decides to go along with Makoto anyways because the plot needs them to agree so the story can move forward.
Monster!
Or, you know, Joker has a criminal record, is on probation, and it's been shown that the police are crooked as all hell.
Regardless, this guy would be in real trouble. He's on probation after all.
Really now? It's the word that applies to you. Your sentence lasts until next spring, right? That's why you're gonna be here for the coming year. Cause any problems, and you'll be sent straight to Cvit.
Things would get rough if we didn't have our leader. And I totally don't want to deal with the police.
Even if the police can't prove it, they'd still investigate and, you know, look through Joker's phone and find all these texts between him and his friends, talking about, you know, calling cards. But hey, I guess that point wasn't needed as well.
Before getting into the investigation, it's worth looking at why any of this is happening. Up to this point, there's been occasional scenes where the school's Humpty Dumpty looking principal that's straight out of Spirited Away
Please, he's more like Popo.
Now bravissimo!
has asked Makoto to look into things because of her role as the student council president, namely the Phantom Thieves and the Red Light District student disappearances, and threatens her by saying he will not give her a letter of recommendation for university if she does not sort these cases out.
No, he doesn't threaten her with that.
You have been at the top of your class since day one. Your conduct is good, and teachers favor you. I could write you a recommendation for any college of your choosing, Makoto Nijima.
Thank you.
Your lineage must certainly play a part in this excellence. Your sister is still young, yet she holds an admirable position at the public prosecutor's office, no? If something disappointing were to happen here, that wouldn't reflect very well on your sister. Do you understand?
Do you understand?
Yes.
How wise. It's no wonder you're our student council president.
He tries to goad her with the recommendation letter and then tops it off by saying if she doesn't do this, she'll hurt her sister's reputation.
This is yet again another case of the game's anime roots clashing with the desire to show darker, realistic scenarios. The student council president having power over the entire school and unrealistic expectations is another trope that comes from a lot of anime. But in the case of Persona 5, where the game is mostly rooted in reality and attempts to be mostly realistic outside of the metaverse and everything surrounding it, this just doesn't fit at all.
Guess the drug was too strong. You'll be in my custody over the next year. I was wondering what kind of unruly kid would show up. But you're the one, huh?
I see. Everything that happens from here on in is real. Is that your cognition of this?
It's impossible to believe that a 17-year-old student would have the sole responsibility of literally tracking down a mafia boss and criminals that have not even been able to be caught by the police.
Funnily enough, this anime trope of the student council president having this much power is actually an aversion. It's an aversion of the role with the nearly perfect all anime fantastical elements removed, and having a level of power higher than the teachers and basically making the goddess of the school say, like Mitsuru, she is completely powerless and is basically a glorified gopher for the principal. All the students hate her, including the party at first, because they assume that she was trying to help cover up Kamoshida's abuse, and she's constantly stressed out by the numerous responsibilities, leaving her a far cry from the usual betrayal of the student council president. Thank you, TV tropes! Yeah, Right now, Cvit doesn't understand tropes and doesn't understand how they're being used here in the game.
Even knowing Principal Kawabunga is in cahoots with Shido and is a corrupt piece of shit, after Makoto continuously shows to be incapable of catching the Phantom Thieves and these crime bosses all on her own, why would Humpty Dumpty not go and get other people to help?
Like, who should he get help from? This is a matter that involves the school, and it's actually pretty big a scandal right here. He can't exactly tell the police because they're already working the case, and two, frankly, high schools in Japan are actually more like colleges, and they actually focus on solving issues internally. That's kind of how it works, Cvit.
Okay, even accepting Principal Eggman's contrived demands and inclusion into the story, no student would ever accept this. And outside of some of the school students being involved, this is barely a concern for the school at all. It only gets worse when you realize that this isn't just the case of the principal being corrupt and Makoto being a pushover, but that this is supposedly normal in this world. When you walk to school, you occasionally get scenes of students reacting to story elements, and during this arc, various students bring up the fact that Makoto is supposed to be doing something about this, when this problem is clearly a matter of the police. One kid even goes, "I hate a student council president with no focus," as if that's supposed to make any fucking sense.
Yeah, it's because she's hated by the student. Students can't dislike their student council president now? One of the reasons that the absurdly powerful student council trope in anime and tokusatsu is because they are in charge of most of, if not all of, the student activity in the school. They are in charge of allocating funds to various parts of the student-run programs such as clubs, and also make sure that the class representatives take care of the class duties as well, such as assigning students to cleaning their classrooms as well as get their kids to respect their classes more. Hell, the principal wanted to make Makoto deal with the student body issues over authorities or even a teacher is pretty common, as they run much like colleges. Deal with it in-house to avoid a scandal. For someone who has reviewed anime, you'd think he'd have more knowledge that tropes are often based on reality. What Cvit fails to understand is, again, Japanese culture, and that Makoto is actually an aversion to the trope that he's currently lambasting. Also, can you please read the actual line, "It's not hate I can't handle." It doesn't make sense because you're not reading the actual line.
I don't get it.
The Phantom Thieves figure all this out while standing in the middle of a park, and decide to warp into the palace while completely out in the open because, and I quote, "Nobody notices if a piece of trash disappears from a trash can." Not only does this not make any fucking sense, since anyone looking in their general direction will see them just disappear out of thin air, but Morgana has explicitly stated before that if they use the Metaverse app, it'll pull anybody nearby into the palace with them. But of course, the range of what pulls people in seems to be completely arbitrary to fit whatever the story needs to be at the time, because apparently it was enough to pull in Anne, who was several feet away from them while they were hiding in the alley and she was around the building, but when they're in a crowded public place, it doesn't pull anyone else in. Of course, the reason why no strangers ever pulled in is because they're not needed for the plot. Both Anne and Yusuke were accidentally pulled in because the story needed them to so they could join the party.
Who wants to talk about murders?
First, those people aren't looking at them. Did you forget there's this huge plant structure thing between the two groups? Secondly, the wiki and how we're shown in the story confirms that if they're standing near and observing an app user using the navigator as it's activated is when it pulls people in. Thirdly, this is actually a bit of psychology going on here. It's a phenomenon known as inattentional blindness. I won't go into too many details since this is a long ass video and article, but rather than focusing on every little tiny detail in the world around us, we tend to concentrate on things that are most important, and we often rely on our brain to fill in the blanks. This is highly economical as our attentional, cognitive, and processing resources are limited. This allows us to dedicate our minds to whatever matters the most while still allowing us to have complete, seamless experiences. Basically, unless you're actively looking for it, you won't notice if someone just disappears. And since you need to be actively observing the app user to be pulled in, most people won't be. The mind is a very weird thing, and we're all experiencing this phenomenon. Like, for example, you're playing a video and attempting to explain why a video game is bad and are focusing on lines and examples that fit your narrative but miss out on very key details that prove that you're wrong.
so they go back to their meeting place in the real world to figure things out. Makoto comes to them wanting to help, but the Phantom Thieves call her useless, triggering a flashback of her sister calling her useless, an event that happened literally the day before, which spurs Makoto into action. Remember earlier in the video during Makoto's S-Link section I mentioned that I thought that they showed Makoto struggling under the weight of expectations of everyone around her to be well executed at times, with emphasis on at times, and here's why. They go from well executed scenes where everyone's just kind of an asshole to Makoto, then they also have shit like this, which is Naruto level flashbacks of events that happened the day before when her sister insults her.
That was truly cringeworthy.
I'd like to point out that this is such a major nitpick that he's going off on this for about a scene that takes about...
Right now, you're useless to me. All you do is eat away at my life.
Yeah, I think he's kind of blowing it a little bit out of proportion. Also, his comparison to Naruto is kind of stupid. It's just showing that it's an impact.
Gee, it was really great of them to include this flashback of an event that happened not even 10 minutes earlier in the game, or else I might have not understood Makoto's motives. Again, reinforcing the feeling that the game does not trust people to actually understand what's going on, so they just repeat the same shit a million fucking times.
Apparently so, since you still don't, because it's showing that the words that An used are the same as her sister's and it just sparks something. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? Also, since you don't seem to understand half the game, I'm kind of saying that's kind of warranted.
So Makoto then goes out to seek Kaneshiro, gets caught, and then when you attempt to save her, he blackmails you asking for 3 million yen. So
my word, what is with all these texts? If you have a problem with this, then just say it! Also, we see the actual photos. Not only does that not look like it's leading out of the club or the room, they're still in the club with drugs and alcohol. Also, there's another photo. That can't be good!
You leave his club, take Makoto to Kaneshiro's palace, she awakens her persona, and you leave. This is where Makoto asserts her superiority and basically becomes the new leader of the Phantom Thieves.
Yeah, no, she's the brains of the group. There's a difference between being the brains and being the leader of a group. Just because Makoto is the strategist of the group, that doesn't make her the leader. Ignoring the fact that Joker is a one-man army on his own with his ability to swap personas, Joker also takes care of the management of items and equipment, working with his teammates to keep them together as he does in the case of confidants. He's the one learning new abilities and strategies from other confidants so that Phantom Thieves can be more effective in the cognitive world, and he's also the bloody founder. Just because Makoto becomes the strategist, that doesn't make her the leader. Plenty of other leaders have strong strategists on their team that they take orders from.
What up, boss?
Oh, actually, he's the boss. I just pay for everything and design everything and make everyone look cooler.
What's the word on Strucker?
Point is, while yes, leaders can be strategists, the roles aren't as rigid and completely ignores other reasons as to why Joker is the leader of the group.
Now all you have to do is steal his treasure so he'll stop asking for the money. Kaneshiro's bank is a far cry from the first two, and nothing fits together nearly as well. The enemies you fight are all over the place, and honestly only work when I'm reaching to try to apply what I think could be the reason why they're included in this palace. You fight creatures like angels, Oni, Nekomata, High Pixie, and Orbis, but they don't really have that much connecting their theme together. Like I said a second ago, the reach that I think that can maybe apply them is the angel, Nekomata, and High Pixie are supposed to be his prostitutes you see he has at the club, and Oni is supposed to be his guards, but they still feel kind of like a reach.
I mean, you were reaching before, but why do enemies really need to have a theme going on? But if you want to do stretching, so can I. Let's look at Ouroboros first. He is faithful to his conjurer, in a sense like how goons are faithful to Kaneshiro. Angel? They watch over individuals and warn those who stray from the path. Basically like how the goons of Kaneshiro watch over their victims in order to make sure they don't stray from their debts. High Pixie? The leader of a swarm of pixies. Any pixie in a leadership role with remarkable power is called by this name. One of Kaneshiro's motives is that he wanted to be a big shot. Nina Sid? I don't care if I mispronounce that. She drains the life of her lovers in return for granting them artistic inspiration. Kaneshiro gives the teens an easy job, but then drains them of their freedom and money. Rakasha? His hideous appearance strikes fear into those who see him. Rakasha shapeshifts to deceive his enemies, much like how Kaneshiro's tough guy behavior is nothing more than a front. Now, this is obviously just interpretations on my part, but it's easily passable to make it a connection with how most of the shadows to Kaneshiro if you actually, dig a little deeper than just look at the surface level of things.
These aren't very engaging puzzles, but they get more complicated as the hints start becoming less and less obvious, and it eventually does require some thinking. Then when you're halfway through to the center of the room, the ATMs just start simply being prompts which you could automatically open by hitting left and right. It baffles me that they, for some reason, decided to include something that resembles an actual puzzle in the game, only to drop it halfway through when it actually started to get interesting and engaging. If they were just going to drop it, why did they even have it at the start of the room to begin with? It's like there's no cohesive vision for the dungeon at all. Mechanics are introduced and dropped just as quickly with no explanation. Like usual, Persona 5 can't commit to anything, and after a few more button presses, you've reached the treasure of the boss.
They didn't drop it though. Right after this section, you have to do this puzzle once more.
Yeah, this is big brain time.
This is simply just made to break up the monotony of the 3 puzzles. It's probably due to piss poor word choice, but don't make it seem like the game dropped the entire idea of the puzzle when it didn't. And stop using your editing to make the game look worse.
Like usual, Persona 5 can't commit to anything, and after a few more button presses, you've reached the treasure of the boss. Before talking about Kanashiro's boss fight, there's something I need to mention here too. The safe combination room of the dungeon is also where we see Makoto start to take over other characters' roles and act smarter than everybody else. As the party is taking the elevator down to this room, Anne and Ryuji marvel at the number of vaults in the room, and then Makoto completely impromptu interrupts to say, "If my prediction is correct, check every single one of these small vaults." But that doesn't actually explain how she figured this out. Then once you've done 4 of the ATM puzzles, and it's already obvious what the deal with the room is, she stops the party to explain that this entire floor is the cylinder of a lock. But of course, this isn't enough to show how smart Makoto is. Every single party member is confused but slowly comes to agree with her as she explains more and more, as if it wasn't already clear by the 4th fucking puzzle.
It does actually, since she's noticed the shape and she says it's a prediction, not that she knows for sure. Please, tell me how An, the high school student modeling Ryuji, the delinquent who doesn't study well, and Yusuke as an art student are supposed to get that this is a locked system. Especially when teaching that sort of thing isn't common in schools. You know what is an issue? That Morgana didn't get it because he's shown to be unable to do lockpicking. He should have been the one that has seen this.
Once you open the last section of the room to get to the main safe, she then says, "If my deductions are accurate, that should have been the final mechanism." No shit, Makoto. There's the fucking elevator. It's the same thing with the dialogue trying to make a catchy sound smarter. Makoto's going, "If my deduction is correct, this should be the end." What are you deducing?
It's only a game. Why you have to be mad?
They aren't in the same location, Cvit, nor do they have any sky view of the location. They don't know for a fact that it's the last one, as we, the audience, know, but the characters don't.
We saw it, there was 5 circles on the way down from the elevator. Basically, her deduction is, well, because I could count to 5, that must mean we're at the end.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
That was truly cringeworthy.
Cvit can't count.
Remember how I mentioned that Morgana often explains the palace ruler's thoughts to the players? Well, Makoto now does that too. After Kanashiro says, "People who can't earn money are worthless to me," she explains that he really believes that money is more important than human lives. Thanks, Makoto. I really couldn't have figured that one out by myself.
I guess the characters can't react to what's being said now, otherwise it's sin against writing. Not that she can't say it's pitiful. Oh wait.
The final thing that happens here that secures her as the only person that matters on the team comes in the treasure room, where with no explanation or any reason where she might have known this, she immediately understands that the treasure does not materialize unless the target is given a calling card to scare them first, and takes over the responsibility of sending out the calling card.
Nope, still wrong. First, while Makoto comes up with the idea of the calling card, it's Ryuji who actually distributes it.
You truly are the brains of this Phantom Thieves operation. Ryuji, you should follow her example.
You know, I'm the one who went posting it everywhere, right? I even had to get all dressed up so they wouldn't notice me.
Secondly, Ryuji and Morgana actually do give her hints.
I'll make him regret making me angry.
Anyways, let's begin our operation tomorrow.
First, we need to secure a route to the treasure, like always.
We're supposed to check all of these for the treasure? Found it. It's right here. I don't see anything.
Once we get this far, we need this calling card thing.
A calling card? I see. Making the target believe that the treasure is in danger will cause it to materialize. That's quite a bold trick.
As you can see, Morgana refers to the treasure as being here, and Ryuji brings up the calling card. For someone who gets the game for saying 2 + 2 = 5, you seem to find it hard to believe that, since the thieves have explained to Makoto about taking a person's treasure, and that they have reached the vault where said treasure should be, that it's somehow impossible for Makoto to understand why it hasn't materialized.
Now, the boss here is nothing special. Kaneshiro turns from a blueberry into a fly that rides on top of a piggy bank, for some reason.
I mean, both animals are associated with gluttony.
Sir Junya Kaneshiro, the money-devouring sinner of gluttony, you indulge in...
Which is what Kaneshiro is supposed to be representing as the sin. And then there's the fact that his boss form is called Baal, which is based off Beelzebub, known as the Lord of the Flies.
As a villain, Kaneshiro is predictably weaker than Kamoshida, but he's also worse than Madarame. Like I mentioned before, the connection to the main characters had to Madarame wasn't that strong, but with Kaneshiro, it's hard to care about him at all. We see him in person literally once the entire time, and even in that brief scene, it only happens because Makoto was being uncharacteristically stupid to facilitate it. At least with Madarame, we got to see 2 of his victims, one which became a main party member, and we also saw how despite the way he acted, you did seem to genuinely care about Yusuke deep down. There's no real reason to give a shit about Kaneshiro when the only reason you're targeting him is because Makoto was a dumbass and got caught.
First off, we actually do meet one of Kaneshiro's victims. It was kind of necessary to do to get the plot going.
How did you... I've only told one person about that. Of all people. I can't believe you were the one to find out. You're right. They told me they had an easy part-time job for me, and I ended up smuggling drugs. All I had to do was put envelopes into coin lockers, and they said they'd give me a hefty paycheck. I didn't know what was in the envelopes, though. Still, this is what came out of it. So you knew, huh? They started threatening me right after they deposited the money into my bank account.
Secondly, uncharacteristically stupid. First off, she's a teenager. Secondly, she's being overly emotional. That was kind of the point of the flashback that you complained so much about. It's showing that she's not useless.
Just stay on your high horse and watch. Or do you want to eavesdrop since you're so good at it?
So you wish to get in contact with Kaneshiro? That is what you were just discussing, weren't you? It seemed you just needed to find out where he is.
Hey, you don't gotta answer her honestly. So you're just the good girl type to push over.
Right now, you're useless to me.
I'm not.
What was that?
Fine. I'll help you meet Kaneshiro.
What exactly is she planning on doing?
She had a dead serious look in her eye.
Yeah, she's acting stupid. Yeah, but emotions are the kind of thing that these things called humans deal with, Cvit.
Emotions are dumb and should be hated.
The group decides that their best bet in taking down Medjed is to recruit Alibaba, so they go along with their request, eventually finding out that Alibaba is really Sojiro's daughter Futaba, who's become a shut-in after her mother's death. And just in case you're wondering, of course, it's Makoto who finds out that Alibaba's real identity is Futaba. But don't worry, she's totally not the new leader of the group.
Oh, shut up!
Not that hard of a deduction, really. Again, she's supposed to be the brains of the group, not the leader. Stop trying to push that, it's a terrible joke.
Then they figure out that Futaba does indeed have a palace, and that it's located in her room, but they don't know what she thinks of it as, so they go to talk to her and figure out that she thinks of it as a tomb. In a scene that, once again, Makoto leads, and does all the talking.
Alright then. Our leader, the guy who lives in LeBlanc's attic, wants to speak with you. We're counting on you. Try and get a keyword out of her.
Not really. You even show how they talk to her before you decide to cut it out that they speak through text through Joker's phone.
Before going back to the palace, the team discusses why it took the shape of a desert, and Morgana explains that Futaba probably doesn't know what Tokyo looks like, and probably isn't even interested in the outside world. So the whole thing is a bleak desert. You know, ignoring the fact that Futaba's only been a shut-in for about a year, that's actually a pretty reasonable explanation. Considering that Futaba never leaves her room, her dungeon probably should look extremely desolate. But wait a minute, what's this? It seems like I'm remembering back in the 2D cutscene that happened just a literal minute ago, where the pyramid clearly had a massive village surrounding it, and it wasn't just a bleak desert at all. Hey, what's that in the corner? It almost looks like the Tokyo skyline. It doesn't seem like the game is wanting to make Morgana come off like he's wrong, but no one at all brings up the Tokyo skyline or the village, so I guess that this scene is just animated wrong, and there was just a disconnect between what the game developers were making and whoever animated the 2D cutscene. This is made even more ridiculous by the way that in the 2D cutscene, the pyramid has a city glued around it on all sides and seems quite big.
Alright, so I was going to skip this point since on the surface I do agree that the 2D cutscene did screw up. But there are still a few problems with Cit's point here that I need to point out at this now. The first being that regardless of how her being a shut-in for a year, this ignores the trauma of losing Futaba's mother right in front of the girl, as well as being passed around her relatives until she was dropped up with her abusive dick of an uncle. You know, the one that Cvit kept complaining about while showing that he had no idea how the legal system in Japan works? You may be wondering why this matters. Well, we don't know how well versed Futaba is with Tokyo. As the cutscene says,
I'm honestly surprised at the palace this time. Everywhere we looked was just desert.
Oh yeah, all the other ones until now have just been normal cities outside of the distortion itself.
Thanks to that, we didn't even know we were in a palace our first time going into Kamoshida's.
That's still part of the palace, though. The city may not have been distorted, but it was cognition. Palace rulers may have been criminals, but they were social enough to know the city layout. But Futaba probably doesn't. In fact, I'd bet she isn't even interested in the outside world.
Hence why the whole thing is a bleak desert. Understandable, considering her life.
The Phantom Thieves are specifically talking about the layout of the city. Stuff like streets, routes, and all that jazz. Not that Futaba doesn't know what Tokyo looks like, but rather doesn't know the specific streets and minor locations. I mean, for example, if you ask people where the Empire State Building was, you'd more than likely get someone saying New York City. But if you were to ask someone who's not from New York City to give specific directions towards the Empire State Building, they're probably not going to know what's where off the top of their head. Now, throw in the trauma that Futaba has, and you've got yourself a cocktail of someone who doesn't care to learn about the outside world at this point, but knows that things like the Tokyo skyline exist because it's a major landmark in Tokyo. Secondly, let's talk about definitions, specifically desolate, devoid of inhabitants and visitors. Just because there's a bleeding town around the pyramid, that doesn't mean that there are people in it. Hell, for all we know, that could be how Futaba sees Sojiro's home, especially since how he's mostly at his workplace most of the time. And when we actually visit the town, we can see that it's run down and practically empty save for some shadows. Hell, even Yusuke mentions that the town is quite desolate looking. Just because you can point towards the town, that doesn't mean that it goes against the notion of a bleak desert. Hell, if anything, a ruined town probably makes it even more apparent because there are people who actually live there and disappeared. Thirdly, just because we, the audience, can see the rest of Tokyo, that doesn't mean that the Phantom Thieves can. We see plenty of shots from the Thieves' perspective when they're in Morgana's car form, and we can't see any of the city. Cvit, you are using your knowledge as the player to bash the characters for not knowing what you see. Oh, I'm sorry that the cast doesn't have the ability to have a third-eye view of not only themselves, but also the entire bleak desert.
That was truly cringeworthy.